Today, we dive deep into the story of a lone pilot stranded on a desolate desert planet, and how an unexpected bond with a fierce alien warrior leads to an epic adventure that will leave you questioning what we truly know about survival, loyalty, and the power of ancient traditions. But be warned, this isn't your typical sci-fi tale. In this journey, one simple decision, catching a spear thrown by an alien, becomes the thread that ties two destinies together forever. How far will loyalty stretch, and what happens when duty calls? Welcome to Galactic Conundrums, the place where the unknown becomes a mystery we unravel together. If you've ever wondered about the secrets of the universe, the hidden truths behind UFOs, or the mysteries of alien worlds, you're in the right spot. Are you ready to explore the vast, mysterious world of Car Zera, where the sands hold secrets older than time itself? Keep watching to discover how an ancient bond between two unlikely companions will change everything. Before we jump into today's mind-bending tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss out on more captivating stories like this. Let's get started. Scene 1. Introduction to the desert planet Car Zera and Ethan's solitude. Ethan Carter woke up in a world he didn't recognize, surrounded by an endless stretch of red sand dunes under the blazing heat of twin suns. His mind was foggy, his body aching, as though he had just been through the most brutal storm. Everything around him seemed foreign, and the landscape was unrelenting, vast, barren, and silent. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Car Zera, a desert planet that stretched far beyond the horizon, seemed endless, empty, and unforgiving. The sand burned under the twin suns, each grain sharp like glass, the air thick with heat. Ethan could feel the sting of the hot wind against his skin, and his mouth was parched dry, cracked, desperate for water. There was no sign of life, no comforting sounds, only the harsh, relentless desert that seemed to swallow up everything in its path. The wreckage of his spacecraft lay not too far from where he stood, half buried in the sand. What was once a sleek, advanced vessel was now nothing more than twisted metal and burnt panels. His equipment was useless, and all communications were down. The emergency beacon had been activated on impact, but even it was weak, sending out only faint, broken signals into the vast emptiness. No one was coming for him. Ethan's hands were trembling as he pushed himself off the sand. His body ached from the crash, and his head felt heavy, but there was no time to dwell on it. He needed to survive. He had to find his crew, no matter what it took. They had been through worse pirate attacks, asteroid storms, and even the mess on Callus 9, but they had made it out. They had to be out there somewhere. "I'll find you," he muttered to himself, trying to push away the fear creeping into his thoughts. He checked his emergency pack, barely half a canteen of water, a few supplies, and his makeshift gear. It wouldn't be enough for long in a place like this, but it was all he had. The searing heat was unbearable, and the burning sun seemed to watch him, relentless and unfeeling. His only hope was the emergency beacon, but who knew how long it would take for someone to pick up the signal? He had to act fast. With a deep breath, Ethan adjusted the fabric shield he had rigged to protect his neck from the sun and took his first step forward. The landscape around him shimmered, a constant mirage in the desert heat. The sand seemed to stretch forever, the sky above an empty, unyielding blue. As the hours passed, the heat began to fade, but the desert wasn't any more forgiving. As the sun dipped lower, the temperature plummeted in a flash, and the biting cold of the night began to creep in. Ethan trudged up a particularly steep dune, the muscles in his legs burning from exhaustion. At the peak, he stopped to catch his breath. His chest heaved, the cold night air stinging his lungs. That's when he saw it. A shape moved in the distance. It was hard to make out at first, but there it was just behind a cluster of jagged rocks, a disturbance in the otherwise lifeless desert. He dropped to his knees, hiding behind the dune, his pulse quickening. His fingers curled around the rough sand as his eyes locked on the figure. It was large, taller than him, and its movements were fluid, almost predatory. Ethan squinted, wishing for his binoculars lost in the crash, of course, but even from this distance, he could tell it wasn't human. The figure's skin glinted in the fading light, a deep cobalt blue that contrasted sharply against the desert's crimson landscape. For a moment, Ethan considered retreating. His instinct told him to avoid this being, whatever it was, but there was something in the way it moved, something that told him this creature knew how to survive in the harsh desert. And survival, it seemed, was the only thing that mattered right now. Before he could decide on a plan, the figure's head snapped in his direction. Those golden eyes locked onto him with unnerving precision, and in a heartbeat, the creature was no longer just watching. It had spotted him. The being's movements were swift, instinctual, and before Ethan could react, a long, bone-white spear appeared in its hand. The alien dropped into a combat stance, preparing to strike. A chill ran down Ethan's spine, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, his voice steady, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. He slowly raised his hands in the air, hoping the gesture was understood. The alien paused for a moment, its golden eyes scanning him with cold calculation. Then, without warning, the creature hurled the spear directly at him. Time seemed to slow as the weapon sliced through the air, its sharp point aimed straight for his chest. Ethan's instincts kicked in, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. With a swift motion, he reached out and caught the spear, his hands locking around the shaft just inches from his chest. The force of the impact nearly sent him stumbling backward, pain shooting up his arms as the splinters of the spear dug into his skin, but he held on. The desert fell silent. The alien, tall, fierce, and poised, stared at him, eyes wide with what Ethan could only interpret as shock. For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension was palpable. Then, the alien took a cautious step back, her posture shifting from aggression to something else, something that resembled uncertainty. Ethan lowered the spear slightly, keeping his eyes on her. "Look," he said, trying to keep his voice even, "I don't want to fight. The alien studied him for a long moment, her golden eyes not on his face, but on the spear in his hands. Then, without a word, she knelt before him, her movements slow and deliberate. She spoke in a language he couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable respect, perhaps reverence. Confused, but intrigued, Ethan glanced at the alien in front of him, trying to make sense of this strange encounter. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing: he was no longer alone. Ethan moved carefully, his boots sinking into the shifting sand with each step. The desert had shown no mercy to him, but he couldn't stop now. He had learned to ignore the sting of the wind biting at his skin, the relentless sun beating down from above, and the gnawing thirst that had become his constant companion. But the silence was something else entirely, an eerie quiet that seemed to pulse around him, wrapping itself around his thoughts. It was on the fourth day that he saw her. She appeared between the jagged rocks in the distance, her movements graceful yet purposeful, almost predatory. Her silhouette stood out stark against the shifting sands, a striking figure against the backdrop of the endless desert. The way she moved, fluid, agile, was unlike any human he had ever seen. Even from this far away, Ethan could sense her power. She was no mere traveler. No, this was someone who belonged in this harsh place, someone who had mastered the desert. As she stepped into the light, he saw it clearly. Her skin was a brilliant silver blue, as if it shimmered under the fading sun. It was unlike any human skin, a smooth, metallic hue that seemed to catch the last rays of the dying daylight, glowing faintly as though alive with its own energy. Her long hair, the color of pale moonlight, flowed behind her, tangled in intricate braids decorated with tiny beads and bones, each piece likely holding a deep, personal meaning. Her eyes, though those golden eyes were what caught his attention the most. They glowed like twin orbs of molten gold, unblinking and sharp, scanning the terrain with eerie precision. They didn't just look at him. They measured him, as if weighing his worth, assessing him as one would a potential threat or a creature to be hunted. Ethan instinctively crouched, heart racing, trying to blend into the environment. He couldn't tell if she had seen him yet, but there was no mistaking the aura of danger that surrounded her. Everything about her, from the way she carried herself to the intensity of her gaze, told him that she was a predator, a force to be reckoned with in this desolate world. His instincts screamed at him to flee, but his feet remained frozen in place. Without warning, the figure turned sharply, her eyes locking onto his hiding place with an unsettling accuracy. She knew. She had seen him long before he could make his move. Her stance shifted, and with the fluid grace of a seasoned warrior, she pulled something from her back, a long, gleaming spear, its tip wickedly sharp and made of a material unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The weapon seemed almost alive in her hands, a part of her, an extension of her will. In one swift motion, she hurled the spear with unrelenting force. The weapon cut through the air, its trajectory perfect, aimed right at his chest. Time slowed. The spear spun through the air, the gleam of the metal almost hypnotic as it neared its target. Ethan's heart slammed in his chest, and his mind screamed in a moment of pure instinct. Without thinking, his hands reached out, and before he could register what was happening, his fingers wrapped around the shaft of the spear, stopping it just inches from his body. The impact sent a jolt of pain through his palms as the weapon nearly knocked him off his feet, but he held on, his arms trembling with the effort. The silence that followed was deafening. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Ethan stood there, panting, staring at the alien warrior who had just tried to end his life, and yet, somehow, he had caught her weapon. The air around them seemed thick with tension, the vast desert holding its breath. The woman Lyra, he realized, for she had spoken only moments earlier in a language he couldn't understand, stared at him with wide eyes, her mouth slightly agape. Her gaze flickered between him and the spear in his hands, as if trying to make sense of the impossible. Her body, once poised for another strike, seemed to freeze in place. Ethan lowered the spear, still grasping it tightly. "I don't want trouble," he said, his voice steady, though the fear bubbling inside threatened to overwhelm him. Lyra's eyes narrowed, studying him as though he were a strange, foreign creature, a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. Her body language shifted, and Ethan could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind. Then, without a word, she knelt before him. Slowly, she placed her hands on the ground, her posture one of respect or perhaps submission. Her golden eyes never left his face, the intensity of her gaze unwavering. She spoke again in the alien tongue, but this time, the words seemed different, softer. The tension in her movements had dissipated, replaced by something far deeper. The meaning behind her actions was clear now, even without words. By catching her spear, Ethan had unknowingly followed an ancient, sacred tradition of her people, a tradition that could not be easily dismissed. The laws of her tribe, it seemed, dictated that whoever caught a spear of their warrior would be bound to them, connected forever through the very weapon itself. And Lyra, despite her apparent reluctance, now had no choice but to protect him. It was a law as old as the desert itself. Ethan stood there in stunned silence, not sure what to say or do. But Lyra was already rising, her movements graceful and deliberate. She gestured to the spear he still held, the weight of her people's ancient customs hanging heavy in the air. She spoke again, this time in broken, but clear words. "You are mine now. Forever." The words were foreign, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. Ethan had never believed in fate, but in that moment, it felt like the desert itself had chosen him, tethered him to this mysterious warrior with a bond neither of them could escape. Lyra didn't look pleased, but her eyes softened slightly. The bond was made. And there was no turning back. Do you enjoy this story? Do you think their journey has only just begun, or is there so much more waiting for them out there? Leave your comment below. Galactic Conundrums always wants to hear your thoughts. Let's keep the story going. Ethan's body ached from the endless walk across the unforgiving desert, but the weight of his situation pressed him forward, step after agonizing step. as the twin suns set behind them, painting the sky with hues of violet and crimson. He found himself facing Lyra, an ally by circumstance but a stranger by every other measure. Her cold gaze had softened ever so slightly since their first encounter, but the air between them still buzzed with an underlying tension. The desert, with its unforgiving expanse of sand, stretched endlessly before them, and every grain beneath their feet seemed to mock Ethan's hope of ever escaping. It had been days since their unlikely meeting, and his goal remained unchanged, to find his crew, lost somewhere in this vast, desolate world. But Lyra had made it clear he could not proceed alone. She would help him, but only if he helped her first. The wind carried with it a thick veil of dust as Lyra finally spoke, her voice cutting through the silence. "You want my help?" she asked, her words crisp and deliberate, like the sharp edge of her spear. "Then you must first help me?" Ethan's brow furrowed as he looked at her, unsure of what she was implying. His thirst was unbearable, his body weak, but he understood enough to know that she wasn't offering anything out of kindness. "I need to find my crew," he said, his voice hoarse from days of dry air and desperation. "What do you need from me?" Lyra's golden eyes narrowed. "There are nomads in this desert, roaming savages who prey upon the weak. They have taken what is mine. My tribe is threatened, and I will not allow them to destroy everything we've worked for." Her words hung in the air, as harsh and unforgiving as the desert itself. Ethan's thoughts raced. The nomads. He had seen their tracks before, scattered, erratic paths that crisscrossed the dunes. They were dangerous, ruthless, and clearly a force to be reckoned with. "And what do you want me to do about it?" Ethan asked, his tone reluctant. Lyra's eyes flashed with something more than resolve. It was a flicker of desperation of a plan that had to work. "Help me drive them out. Help me defend my tribe. If you do this, I will help you find your people." Ethan stared at her, feeling the weight of her words. In that moment, his options felt limited, his choices narrowing. But as he looked at her, standing tall and poised in the fading light of dusk, something inside him stirred a sense of something more than survival. Perhaps this was the way forward, the only way out of this cursed desert. "Fine," Ethan said, his voice firm, even though the prospect of facing more danger was far from appealing. "But after this, you help me. You help me find my crew." Lyra nodded, a slight shift of acknowledgement. Without another word, she turned and began walking, her figure melting with the twilight shadows. Ethan hesitated only for a moment before following her, his boots crunching softly in the sand. The journey had just taken a new direction, and despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone anymore. The desert night settled around them, cold and oppressive, as they trekked forward. The wind howled with a mournful cry, carrying the scent of sand and something far more primal. Above, the stars twinkled faintly, distant and cold, as if watching the small, fleeting drama of their journey unfold below. Ethan couldn't help but notice the eerie stillness that seemed to cloak Lyra as they moved. She walked with a purpose, her posture stiff and unyielding. Even in the darkness, he could see the faint glow of her skin, casting an otherworldly aura around her. Her every step was measured, deliberate, as though each footfall in the sand carried with it the weight of her ancestors, her tribe, and a world far removed from his own. The journey felt endless, and every step was a reminder of just how alien this place was to Ethan. But as the days stretched on, the quiet between him and Lyra began to shift. The tension that once hummed in the air between them was slowly replaced by something else, a grudging respect. Ethan learned quickly that Lyra was not just a warrior, she was a survivor. Her knowledge of the desert was unparalleled. She knew the land as if it were an extension of herself, and she moved through it with a fluidity that Ethan could only admire. She taught him how to find shelter in the rocks during the scorching heat of midday, how to filter water from the scarce springs they encountered, and how to navigate by the stars when the darkness swallowed everything else. In turn, Ethan proved his worth. His military training, his ability to think quickly under pressure, became indispensable. Together, they found food, avoided deadly creatures that stalked the desert, and fended off several attacks from nomads, each one more brutal than the last. But with each victory, their bond deepened. There were moments, brief but real, when they shared glances of understanding, when the harshness of the desert faded for a split second, and they saw each other not as enemies or strangers, but as two survivors caught in the same cruel fate. Ethan began to see that Lyra's strength was not just in her combat skills but in her resilience, the way she refused to give up, even when every instinct told her to. He admired that about her, though he would never say it aloud. As they ventured further into the heart of the desert, the stakes grew higher. The nomads were no longer just a distant threat. They were drawing closer, and soon, Lyra's tribe would be forced into a final stand. The air crackled with tension, thick and suffocating. Ethan couldn't help but wonder how long they could survive this alliance, the kind of alliance forged not from friendship, but from necessity. But necessity was a powerful force, and in the desert, it was enough. The desert was quieter now, an unsettling stillness hanging in the air. Lyra and Ethan had reached the edge of a canyon, where jagged cliffs rose like the spines of some ancient, forgotten creature. The wind here had a different sound, more of a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the rocks, carrying a low, mournful tone, as though the land itself was alive with something more than mere earth and sand. It was in this strange place that Lyra stopped, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. She had been tense, focused, but now there was an edge to her, the kind of sharpness that only came when a predator was close. Ethan could feel it, too. The air felt heavier, thick with anticipation. Something was out there. "We're close," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the ground at her feet. She knelt, brushing her fingers lightly against the sand, feeling its subtle vibrations. Ethan stood still, watching her. He had learned to trust her instincts by now, But the idea of facing the creature that had terrorized her people for generations made a chill run down his spine. Kronax. The beast was no mere legend. It was a living nightmare, an ancient, subterranean predator that lurked beneath the surface of the desert, hidden in the deep tunnels of the planet. Massive, monstrous, and with a hunger that could devour entire tribes in a single night. The stories of Kronax were whispered in fear among Lyra's people. Some said it had no eyes, others claimed it was made of darkness itself. But all agreed on one thing: it could not be allowed to roam freely. "We need to lure it into the canyon," Lyra continued, standing up and turning to face him. Her expression was grim, yet resolute. "It won't be easy. Kronax has sensed us before. It knows we're here. We can only hope that the noise will draw it in." Ethan nodded, his heart thudding in his chest. The canyon ahead of them was narrow, a winding passage between two towering cliffs that seemed to stretch up endlessly toward the heavens. It was their only hope, a natural trap, a place where the beast's size would work against it. But even as they prepared, Ethan could feel the weight of the plan sinking in. "Once it's in," he said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up on him, "we'll need to trigger the explosives. It'll have nowhere to go." Lyra's lips tightened into a thin line. "If we don't kill it in one strike, we're dead." Her tone was low, as if the very thought of failure made her skin crawl. They moved quickly, setting their traps, explosives planted along the canyon walls, placed just right so that when Kronax moved through the narrowest point, the rock would collapse and bury it alive. They worked in silence, their movements synchronized as if they had been partners in this war for years, not days. The desert around them seemed to shift as they prepared, as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. The air grew thicker, the ground trembled ever so slightly beneath their feet. The subtle vibrations, almost imperceptible, warned them that Kronax was near. Lyra's body tensed, her eyes darting to the horizon, her fingers closing around the shaft of her spear. Ethan's hand hovered over the detonator. And then it came. At first, it was just a rumble beneath the earth, a low, grinding sound that seemed to come from deep inside the planet itself. The sand shifted, as though the ground was awakening from a deep slumber. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the noise grew louder, shaking the very air around them. A shadow moved beneath the surface, like a ripple in water, only this was no peaceful current. It was the movement of something ancient, something hungry. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and Lyra's eyes widened with a mix of fear and determination. "It's here," she whispered. Ethan barely had time to react before the earth exploded. From beneath the sand, a massive, dark shape shot upwards with terrifying speed. It was a creature unlike anything Ethan had ever imagined. Its body was massive, its form twisting and contorting as it pushed its way through the sand. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent gray, stretched taut over muscles that rippled like the tides of a stormy ocean. Its claws, long and jagged, scraped against the canyon floor, sending sparks of light into the air. Kronax's body was a twisted amalgamation of scales, sinew, and raw power. Its mouth, white and gaping, was filled with rows of teeth as sharp as knives, glinting in a dim light. And yet, it had no eyes, no way to see, only to hunt by sound and vibration. Ethan's blood ran cold as it turned its massive, grotesque head toward them, its enormous body slowly slithering into the canyon. It had sensed their presence. It was here. Lyra didn't hesitate. She darted forward, using the canyon's winding path to her advantage. With her spear raised, she shouted something in her native tongue, a battle cry that seemed to resonate with the very rocks around them. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, a sharp, jagged note that reached the ears of Kronax. The creature roared in response, its mouth gaping wider as it lunged forward. Ethan could hear the rumbling of its massive claws scraping against the canyon floor, its body thundering toward them. He took a deep breath, then pressed a button. The explosion rocked the canyon with deafening force. The walls shuddered, the sound of crumbling rock filling the air as tons of stone came crashing down from the cliffs above. The ground shook violently as the canyon began to collapse, and Ethan could see the massive form of Kronax struggling, its claws scraping desperately at the falling rocks, trying to climb, to escape. But it was too late. The rock continued to fall, burying the beast beneath tons of debris. The sound of its roar was muffled by the chaos, but Ethan could still hear it, a final, desperate cry of frustration before it was silenced. For a moment, everything was still. The canyon lay in ruins, the air thick with dust and smoke. Ethan and Lyra stood at the edge, their bodies heaving from the exertion, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. The ground beneath them was still trembling, but the worst of it was over. They had won. But even as Lyra lowered her spear, a dark shadow lingered in her eyes. The battle was won, yes, but this victory had come at a cost. Kronax was dead, but the desert was still a place of dangers unseen, of threats that lay buried beneath the surface, waiting to rise again. Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time, he saw something beyond the warrior, the burden of responsibility, the weight of survival, pressing down on her shoulders. In that moment, he realized that they weren't just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for something much larger, something that would affect not just them, but the fate of her people, and perhaps the entire world. And for that, they would need to face even greater challenges ahead. The journey back to the tribe was one of silence and tension. The once dreaded roar of Kronax still echoed in Lyra's ears, but now it was replaced by something far more dangerous, the storm brewing within her own people. The air around them was thick with unease, a storm cloud hanging over the horizon of her thoughts as she approached the place she once called home. As they neared the settlement, the scent of firewood and herbs, once comforting, now seemed tainted by the distant memory of fear. The camp was eerily quiet, as if it, too, sensed the coming clash. The sky overhead had turned a dull amber, casting an ominous glow over the structures. Tents and makeshift shelters, once full of laughter and life, now seemed like hollow reminders of what had been lost. Her tribe, her people, were no longer the unified force they once were. Lyra's heart sank as she walked deeper into the camp, the weight of the changes too obvious to ignore. The faces of her people were marked by fear and uncertainty. They looked up at her as if seeing a ghost, the warrior who had disappeared for so long, only to return to a fractured tribe. The bond she once shared with them had grown cold, strained by the harsh choices made in her absence. And there, standing at the center of the settlement, was Verak. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence loomed over them all. His once pale blue skin now seemed darker, more hardened, as if the desert itself had molded him into something colder, more ruthless. His golden eyes, which once held the promise of honor, were now narrow, calculating, and devoid of mercy. His spear was raised high, a symbol of power over the tribe he had forced into submission. Around him stood his loyal followers, a mixture of fear and obedience in their eyes, but there was no respect left in their gaze. Lyra could feel the tension in the air. She could feel the eyes of the tribe upon her as she stepped forward, her presence demanding attention. Her footsteps were deliberate, but as she moved closer to Verak, something inside her twisted. He had taken everything from her. He had taken her people's hope, their unity, and now he was threatening to take the very essence of what made them strong. Verak, she said, her voice steady but laced with fury, you've led us into darkness. Verak's eyes flicked to her, a sneer forming on his lips as he took a slow step toward her. Ah, the lost child returns, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. What are you now, Lyra? A hero? A savior? Or just another failed warrior? His words hit her like a lash, but Lyra stood firm. She had fought beasts, faced death, and survived the unthinkable. But this was a fight for her people, a fight for their future. I came back to protect this tribe, she said, her voice rising, to bring us together, not to see it crumble under your rule. Verak's laugh echoed through the camp, a cold, empty sound. You think your return means anything? The nomads still raid us, Kronax is dead but we still face extinction. You want to protect the weak? You want to keep them here, to feed them, to coddle them? While we are all slowly dying. His fist clenched tightly around his spear, and he raised it, pointing it directly at her. Your weakness is what has brought us to this. You will never understand what it means to lead in these times. Lyra's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing as she took a step toward him. Weakness, she repeated. Weakness is leaving our people to die because they are not strong enough. Strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. It's knowing when to fight, yes, but also when to shield the vulnerable from the storm. For a moment, silence fell between them. The wind whistled through the gaps in the shelters, and the tension was palpable, thick as the heat of the desert sun. The tribe watched, unsure, hesitant. But Lyra could see there were cracks in Verak's facade, cracks in the loyalty of those who followed him. Fear had kept them in line, but fear could only hold for so long. Varek's eyes flared with anger, and he took a step toward her, his spear gleaming in the fading light. "You have no right to speak to me like this, Lyra. You abandoned us. You left us to fend for ourselves while you disappeared into the desert." Lyra stood her ground. "I left because I was no use to you then. But I am here now. I've faced what you've never dared to face. And I will not allow you to turn us into monsters, abandoning the very people we swore to protect." The camp was alive with murmurs now, the tribe uncertain. Some were starting to nod, their eyes flickering between Lyra and Varek. They knew she spoke the truth, they could feel it. The very strength of their people, their survival, depended on their unity, not on their willingness to cast off the weak. Varek's gaze darkened, his hand tightening around the spear. "You want to speak of unity? You want to speak of strength? Then prove it," he sneered, his voice cold and commanding. "Fight me. Show me that you have what it takes to lead." Lyra's heart raced, but her resolve was unshakable. She had fought beasts, faced dangers beyond imagining, but this battle was different. This wasn't just for survival, it was for the soul of her tribe. "I don't need to prove anything to you," she said, her voice low, but full of fire. "The proof is in the people we protect, in the strength of our bond, not in your cruelty. You have forgotten what it means to lead. And I will remind you." Varek's face twisted into a snarl, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, something that had been missing before. The tribe was beginning to turn, their eyes no longer filled with fear, but with something else. Hope. They saw in Lyra what they had been missing, a leader who cared not for power, but for them. With a final, defiant motion, Lyra raised her spear. "I will lead this tribe. Not through fear, but through strength and compassion." The silence hung heavy, but it was broken by a single voice, a woman from the crowd, standing in the shadows, who called out, "She speaks the truth." And then another. "We follow Lyra." A ripple of agreement spread through the tribe like a wave. Lyra could feel it, a shift, a return to something pure. Varek stood still, his fists clenched, his spear still pointed at her. But the power had already shifted. The tribe was no longer his to command. With a final glance, Lyra turned away from him, her gaze sweeping over the tribe. She didn't need to fight him. She had already won. The tribe had chosen. And now, it was time to rebuild. Do you enjoy this story? Do you think their journey has only just begun, or is there so much more waiting for them out there? Leave your comment below. Galactic Conundrums always wants to hear your thoughts. Let's keep the story going. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of dust and the faint crackle of fire through the air. The camp was alive with whispers, the tension between the old and new settling heavily over the tribe. Lyra stood at the center of it all, her feet planted firmly on the earth, as if the very ground beneath her had chosen her, bound her to this moment. Varak was gone now, his arrogant gaze replaced by the vacant stares of his followers, who were now uncertain of the path they had walked so blindly behind him. The harshness of his rule had crumbled, and with it, the fear that had kept the tribe in line. In his place, Lyra stood, unwavering, her golden eyes gleaming with an inner fire, her every movement embodying strength, resolve, and compassion. Around her, the tribe was gathered. Their faces, once clouded with fear and doubt, now held a flicker of hope. Lyra had shown them that leadership was not about power, but about the people you protected. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The elders, those who still clung to tradition, now stepped forward, their robes flowing like the desert wind. They gathered around her, the firelight casting long shadows across their faces. Their eyes, ancient and wise, scanned her no longer with suspicion, but with an unspoken acknowledgement that only time and experience could yield. One of the elders, a woman whose face was etched with lines of age and hardship, raised her hand to silence the crowd. Her voice, when it came, was slow and deliberate, the weight of the words heavy with authority. "Lyra Vance," she began, her voice carrying across the quiet camp. "You have returned to us when we needed you most. You have fought not for glory, but for the survival of our people. Your actions have proven your strength, your courage, and your ability to lead." The air seemed to shimmer with a strange energy, the wind stilled as if the very desert held its breath. Lyra stood motionless, her gaze unwavering as the elder continued. "We, the elders, have seen what you are capable of. It is not power that makes a leader, but the ability to protect those you love, to make the hard choices, and to stand firm even when the world around you crumbles. Today, we do not just welcome you back. We confirm you as our leader." The words struck deep, but they did not settle in her chest with pride. Instead, they anchored her, solidifying her place not just in this tribe, but in the vast, ancient world of Car Zera. Her people had seen the truth, and they had chosen her not as a warrior, but as their protector, their strength. Lyra's heart was steady, her breath calm, but her mind was alive with thoughts of what lay ahead. The desert had shown her the fragility of life, the strength that came from unity, and the ever-present threat of the nomads and the creatures that lurked beyond the horizon. Her people were weak, scattered, but they had survived so far because of their bond. And she would not let that bond break. With a slow, deliberate motion, Lyra stepped forward, raising her hands to the sky. Her voice was soft but carried with it the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. "I accept this responsibility," she said, her tone clear and unwavering. "I will protect you all. I will lead us, not to conquer, but to survive and thrive. Together, we will rebuild what has been lost, and face the dangers that lurk in the shadows. We are not just a tribe. We are a people, and as long as we stand united, nothing will break us." The tribe responded, not with a roar, but with a collective sigh, as if the burden of the past had been lifted from their shoulders. The fear that had once gripped their hearts melted away, replaced by something far more powerful: hope. Lyra could feel it, radiating from them like the warmth of the first light of dawn. The elders nodded, their faces softened by the relief of knowing that their tribe was in safe hands. One by one, they came forward, offering their support, their respect, their hands raised in acknowledgement of the new leader. The fire crackled, its flames dancing in the cool desert air, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the night was filled with a sound of quiet celebration. The tribe had found its strength again. And in Lyra, they had found their leader. As the night deepened and the stars filled the sky, Lyra turned her gaze toward the horizon, her mind already preparing for the challenges ahead. The desert, with all its dangers and secrets, still lay before them. But now, with her people behind her, she felt a sense of purpose that cut through the uncertainty. The journey was just beginning. And no matter what came, Lyra would stand as the heart of her tribe, unwavering, unyielding. Her people would thrive, and the desert would not swallow them whole. The night was still as the desert before a storm, heavy with an unspoken tension that hung in the air between Lyra and Ethan. The stars above, countless and cold, blinked down upon them like distant eyes, witnesses to the quiet exchange of a bond that neither could have foreseen. The fire crackled between them, its flames dancing and flickering, casting long shadows against the stones that surrounded their camp. Lyra stood by the edge of the campfire, her posture unwavering, the deep blue of her skin reflecting the fire's glow. Her hair, braided with small bones and beads, seemed to shimmer like silver threads caught in the light. She was the leader now, unmistakable, powerful, and serene in her new role, but in this moment, she was not just the leader of her people. She was the warrior who had fought beside him, the ally he had come to rely on, the woman who had shown him what true strength meant. Ethan stood opposite her, the weight of their shared experiences pressing heavily on his shoulders. His uniform, once pristine, was now battered and worn, stained with the desert dust that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. His eyes, dark with exhaustion, reflected the firelight, but beneath that weariness, there was something else, something deeper, something that had grown over the days they had spent together in the heart of Car Zera. A connection. "Tomorrow, I leave," Ethan said quietly, his voice almost lost to the wind that whispered through the canyon walls. His hand tightened around the hilt of the small knife he had taken from the wreckage of his ship, the only weapon left to him now. He had to fix the ship, find his crew, and leave this desert behind. His mission was clear, but it felt like something more was being left behind with every passing second. Lyra did not speak at first. Instead, she stepped closer to the fire, the shadows of the night clinging to her as though they, too, were unwilling to let go. Her gaze, steady and penetrating, met his. There was no need for words. Ethan could see it in the way she held herself, in the unspoken tension between them, the truth that both had known but had not yet acknowledged. "I can't stay," he continued, the words tasting strange on his tongue. "I have a duty. A crew to find. A ship to fix. But I won't forget this place." I won't forget you." For a moment, Lyra said nothing. She simply stood there, the desert night wrapping around them like a shroud. The distant howl of the wind carried with it the quiet whispers of time itself, reminding them both that nothing was permanent, not the stars above them, not the desert beneath their feet, not even the bond they had forged in the heat of battle. Then, softly, she spoke. "You have your path, Ethan Carter. And I have mine. But our paths are not so different. We fight for the same thing, for survival, for the ones we protect." Her voice was low, rich with an ancient wisdom that seemed to echo in the very air between them. The promise of something beyond the moment lingered in the silence that followed her words. "I don't want to say goodbye," she said, her gaze flicking down to the ground, then back to him. Her voice softened, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability in her tone, a crack in the armor she had worn so long. "But I know you must go. You have your duty, just as I have mine. But if you ever need me, if the winds of fate ever bring you back here, I will be waiting." Ethan's heart tightened, the weight of her words settling on him like the very sands of Car Zera. There was a quiet power in her promise, a bond that transcended distance, a connection forged not by circumstance, but by something deeper, something that neither time nor space could sever. He stepped closer to her, the heat of the fire warming his skin as he looked into her eyes, those golden eyes, fierce and unyielding, yet full of understanding. "If you ever need me, Lyra, if you ever need help, I will return. No matter where I am. No matter how far." For a moment, they simply stood there, the air thick with everything unsaid. The desert, vast and unknowable, stretched before them, but in this small, fleeting moment, they were both anchored to something solid, something real. Lyra's hand, strong and steady, reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his. The touch was brief, but it was enough. In that touch, there was a promise, a vow that neither of them would forget, no matter where the winds of time carried them. "Then I will wait for your return," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "Until then, may the desert keep you safe, Ethan Carter." And with that, the moment passed. Ethan turned away, his footsteps soft in the sand, the echoes of the promise between them lingering in the air. The fire crackled behind him, the desert stretching endlessly before him, but he knew that no matter how far he went, no matter where his journey took him, a part of him would always remain in that desert, with Lyra. The stars above flickered in the night, indifferent to the promises made beneath them, but to Ethan and Lyra, they burned bright with the certainty of a bond that could not be broken. And with the final touch of the wind, the desert whispered its quiet answer, "I will return." The ship loomed in the distance, a silhouette against the pale light of the rising suns. Ethan, Sam, and Lena stood at the edge of the makeshift landing zone, their eyes fixed on the vessel that would carry them away from Car Zera. The dusty winds blew across the desert plains, stirring the sand into small, swirling tornadoes that caught the light, casting fleeting shadows on the ground. The air had a dry, metallic taste, as if the planet itself was reluctant to let them go. Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. This was it. After all they had been through, facing the horrors of Kronax, the deadly desert, and the turmoil of Lyra's tribe, he was finally leaving. He was headed back into the vast, cold expanse of space, where answers and his missing crew awaited. But even as the distant hum of the ship's engines grew louder, there was something else pulling at his heart, something that tethered him to this moment, to this planet, to the woman who had changed everything for him. Lyra. She stood a little farther away, near the base of a large stone outcrop, her figure outlined against the backdrop of the fading twilight sky. The desert had claimed her, its harsh winds, its deadly beauty, and its quiet, relentless power. But there was something in her posture that made her seem as timeless as the stars themselves. She was still unmoving, resolute, as though she were absorbing every last moment of the connection that had formed between them. Her golden eyes were fixed on him, unwavering, even from this distance. Ethan's gaze lingered on her, the pull of her presence strong despite the growing distance between them. He had made a promise. A promise that he would return, if ever she called. And somehow, deep inside, he knew that this wasn't goodbye. It couldn't be. Sam and Lena were busy preparing the ship for launch, checking the fuel levels, securing the last of their supplies. The urgency of their mission was clear. Time was of the essence. But for a brief moment, Ethan couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure of Lyra, standing there like a guardian of the desert, her silhouette etched against the fading sun. Then, as if sensing his thoughts, Lyra raised her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried with it all the weight of their shared journey, the bond they had forged in the heart of the desert. Her hand moved in a slow, deliberate arc, as if offering him something that was both a farewell and a promise. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, he raised his hand in return, his fingers brushing the air between them. It was a silent promise, one that would endure beyond time, beyond the distance of the stars. A vow that no matter how far apart they were, no matter the obstacles that lay between them, their bond would remain. The sound of the ship's engines grew louder, the time to leave drawing closer. Ethan's mind raced with thoughts of his crew, the mission that lay ahead, and the world he was leaving behind. But as he stood there, looking toward Lyra, the weight of it all seemed to fade. He had done what he came to do. He had made a difference here. And now, it was time to continue. "Let's go," Sam's voice broke through the moment, calling from the ship's hatch. Ethan nodded, his gaze lingering one last time on Lyra. Her figure, now framed by the rising light, seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow, as if she were part of the very desert itself. He turned toward the ship, his steps slow but steady, as if reluctant to leave. But as he climbed aboard, the hum of the engines beneath him seemed to solidify his resolve. He had made a promise. And someday, he would keep it. As the ship rose into the air, the planet of Car Zera shrinking beneath them, Ethan glanced out of the viewport. There, in the distance, Lyra still stood, her hand still raised in farewell, her eyes never leaving his. The stars stretched out before them, vast and endless, but Ethan knew something now that he hadn't before. Distance could not sever the bond they shared. No matter how far the stars took him, no matter how many light years lay between them, their connection would endure. It was not just a promise. It was a truth that lived in the very fabric of the universe. And so, as the ship soared into the cold expanse of space, Ethan whispered to the desert winds, "I will return." The silence of the cosmos seemed to answer him, as though the desert itself had heard his vow. One day, they would meet again. As the stars blinked overhead, stretching out into the endless dark, Ethan's ship made its way further into the void of space, leaving Car Zera and its desert sands behind. But the bond he shared with Lyra, a connection forged by fate and strengthened by a promise, would never be severed. No matter how far the galaxy took him, no matter how many light years lay between them, their paths would cross again. The desert had not only shaped Lyra's strength, it had shaped their future. But what happens when those promises are tested? What if the desert calls again, or an ancient power rises once more? As Ethan's journey continues, the universe has a way of revealing its deepest secrets, and some mysteries are meant to be unraveled together. What's next for Lyra and Ethan? Will their paths cross again? And what new challenges await them both in the vast, mysterious expanse of space? The answers may be closer than they think. What do you think will happen next? Drop your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. I'd love to hear your theories. And as always, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more untold mysteries of the cosmos. Stay curious, stay adventurous, and never stop asking the questions that the universe hides.